Minneapolis is a union town. It means we've got our workers' backs, and I have a track record of doing that. Workers power the city. It's obvious, so it's only right for our workforce to make a living wage and comfortably stay here. As mayor, I will commit to an affordable city with a $20 minimum wage. Our workers
$10
won't get
less than
squeezed by rising
Zoran's.
prices and low pay, while big businesses continue to profit. But that's not enough. Last year, the mayor vetoed the Labor Standards Board, an opportunity for workers to have a seat at the
Okay. We
table
don't have to get too into this, but one question:
Yes, sir.
when people, he's obviously Somali. That was Omar Fate,
Yes.
the mayoral candidate in Minneapolis, kind of like a Zoran type. To what extent is it about? How big is the Somali population in Minneapolis? To what extent does it matter that he's Somali in local politics? You have a sense?
Hugely important. I think there are two. Okay, so there's no precise number. The estimates of Somalis who live in Minnesota ranges from about 80,000 to about 150,000. And for context, the majority of them are concentrated in the Twin Cities. So with Minneapolis having a population of over 400,000, it's a pretty significant contingent there, 10 to 15% or so. And so in the state at large, they're a relatively small percentage of the population, about 1.52%. So it's not a big percentage, but in the Twin Cities, they're an extremely important contingent, about 15%. And if you nail down that group and then also line up the left-wing progressives, you have a coalition that is becoming super powerful. I mean, originally he got the DFL, Democratic, and then Farm and Labor. They have a unique Democratic Party, Minnesota. He lined up their endorsement at first, and he has a bunch of so it's not 50%, but 15% in that city goes a long way.
You say at first. So did they pull back their endorsement of him? Is that what happened?
They did. They did pull back. There are a lot of controversies about the state political dynamics, and for context, Jacob Fry, as his name is pronounced, is the incumbent, and he's a liberal. He himself, of course, Democratic, and he's quite progressive. Like, he gets very engaged in Somali stuff. He's released commercials speaking Somali, and he participates in a lot of their cultural events. So this is a super important block of the Minneapolis voter base. And what he's done, again, I can't stress this enough, because you might be like, yeah, 10, 50, whatever, is when you get 100% of them and you just need 35% more, and you have a lot of people who are on the sort of left-wing progressive leftist side of things, you're going to have a potentially winning coalition.
So he's challenging Fry from the left.
Yes.
Even though Fry himself is known as being quite progressive. I mean, he was the George Floyd mayor.
Yes. He is very progressive. But he's getting challenged from the left, especially on, I mean, I can't stress enough, like, how similar Omar Fate's candidacy is to Zoran's. Like, Zoran, in that recent Vanity Fair extensive profile by James Pogue, he talked about, he realized one of his core political insights was the Muslims are a huge voter bloc in New York City, and they aren't often at the table. And he says the line of, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And he basically built a coalition that's based on that support. But he also then got the next wing of support, just like Omar Fate, where he went super left on politics. I believe Fateh is a democratic socialist. He's and look at this. Okay, so here's some polling. It's a little dated, but you can see, I mean, his support is far from trivial. Now, it has taken a slight dip since August, because there was a disclosure that essentially he and his wife. His wife's company financially was benefiting from his campaign, and so there was a bit of a controversy about that.
I've got a question here, which is Somalis. I mean, Somalia is one of the most conservative countries on earth. I mean, if we're talking, I'm not talking about free market economics. I'm talking about social values. One of the most devoutly, almost 100%. I believe you look up the stats for Somalia, I believe it's 100% Muslim, and it's extremely. I mean, people would say repressive in many ways, especially toward women and so on. But he's super progressive.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of that?
You know, we've talked about this before, because we did a video on Dearborn, Michigan, which has been all over Twitter, all over the news lately. It's America's Arab majority city. It's where Ford's based, but it's also the site of, it's kind of like the epicenter of if Arab Americans had a capital, be in Dearborn. And, there is, like in Dearborn, an unwieldy, kind of awkward coalition that Omar Fate represents between a conservative Muslim base that also does not like Republicans for tribal reasons. And yes, Dearborn ended up voting for Trump, but it's very different in the Somali community. They do not like Republicans. Yes, there were some Republicans. Yes, they revolted when there was a school board push toward gender ideology in schools. And they sort of called out and they were like, we're not putting up with this. And then they got permission to opt out.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
the Somali parents got permission to take their kids out of gender-related stuff.
I don't know
in
if it's in every school district, but one of the main ones where their kids are, they got permission to opt out. And so, yeah, it's this really bizarre situation. And I think the way they view it is like everywhere you go in the Somali community, and it's big. I mean, they have a huge mall, they have a huge neighborhoods, and I say they because it literally is all Somalis in some of the big apartment buildings in Minneapolis. There's one neighborhood, Cedar Riverside, that's almost all Somali. 50% of the people speak Somali. And then, anyways, so yes, it's a very conservative base on social issues, but I still think foreign policy is so core to them. Support of Somalia, the country itself, is so important to them. Like in their mall, they have this big mall called the Carmel Mall. And on every single floor, this 4-story massive complex, huge mall. I mean, it's the most interesting mall in Minnesota, more than the Mall of America at this point, because it's growing like crazy. Anyways, every building, you have a bunch of businesses that allow you to send money to your home country, and that's what a lot of people do. And recently, Ilhan Omar has talked about focusing on policies that benefit Somalia as their top priority. Omar Fate's used rhetoric like that. So how the U.S. treats Somalia is more important than, say, gender ideology, trans women, and women's sports. And they also feel like a lot of Republicans don't like them.
But the U.S., I mean, what does the U.S. have to do with Somalia?
I think that we talked to actually the parliamentarian of Somalia's parliament yesterday, and he says a lot of Somalis, and I don't know if he's just kind of like buttering us up and trying to butter up our audience, you all, but he was talking about how Somalis love America. And I don't know how true that is, but basically that when their government collapsed in 91 and then they had a famine, the U.S., Clinton starting in 93, they welcomed Somalis in America. And then also they gave a ton of aid, and that continued through Bush. And more recently, they've been helping Somalis, and I had no clue about this, fight ISIS. And like this guy's home state, I guess there are 5, it's a federal state, Somalia. And in his home state, they've been fighting ISIS, and the U.S. has been supporting them. So they're kind of like, we've appreciated, but they are Palestine flags everywhere. And I still think with Ilhan Omar and Omar Fate, they've kind of figured out a way to get their representative to take care of their foreign policy issues and then also be, progressive enough to get the leftist votes.
One thing I remember hearing about when I was in Ethiopia, so the eastern portion of Ethiopia is ethnically Somali. It's like they call it Somali state, and there's a movement within Somalia to take that over.
Yeah,
and they want it. It's called like the Greater Somalia, or something like that. And I've seen stuff from Minneapolis where people will like fly flags for like Greater Somalia, and it's like, it's like a real nationalistic. I mean, close ties between that community and Somalia, which just goes to show. I mean, obviously it's very different. But I do think, a lot of people think like Israel, like it's a unique thing of like, Jews here have ties with Israel. But it's all these different ethnic groups, it's very different, but it's a similar principle, right? Like the fact they're flying Somali flags, they're talking about Somali policy, they're voting based on what they think impacts like their homeland. I don't know, just interesting.
I guess I totally agree. I kind of see two sides to it. On the one side, we saw Norwegian flags flying across state, and 15% of Minnesota has Norwegian heritage. It's the biggest Norwegian population outside of Norway.
Really?
That's what I think it might be combined with Swedes and Finns, but it's the largest population essentially of those Nordic countries outside of Nordic region. And I believe it's true for Norway. I'd have to double check that. By far the highest percentage population of Norwegians in the country. But, and like the king of Norway was in Minnesota right before we got there. So you have, I didn't even know they had a king. But so on the one side, you have a lot of ethnic groups that fly their flags, and you don't really get the same reaction. Whereas I feel like on right-wing Twitter especially, you'll have people go crazy if they see Somalia flag. And so people are proud of their heritage. Like Little Italy, you're telling me the first generation, most of these people came here in 1990 or more recently. Like a lot of these people, it's brand new. In Little Italy, I'm sure there were a lot of mixed ties. I think the difference is how fast this has happened. I mean, like you're in Minneapolis, which peaked its population in 1950, which is kind of interesting. It's
I
one of
didn't
those
know that.
cities. It's kind of like Philadelphia. They had a lot of their milling industry left. It went to rural country, and you had severe suburbanization. Not that it's like a disease, but you had like extreme suburbanization.
I didn't know that. See,
Yeah.
I thought it was a prosperous, growing
It's
city.
kind of trended up, but even so, they've had some high-profile exits. A fun fact about it, without going too deep into the Minneapolis, because I know a lot of you are like, dude, I only know that there are lakes there. Do you have more Fortune 500 companies headquartered in that metro area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, than any other metro area in the country? You have Target, you have United Health Group, you have Cargill, you have Abbott Laboratories, I believe. You have 3M.
More than San Francisco or New York?
Crazy, but like you only have like 600, 700, or maybe in the metro area more than that. But you have like 12 Fortune 500 companies headquartered there. It's crazy. Wow, you wouldn't think that.
No, I know.
There's a ton of money. We saw a Ferrari dealership, the most expensive home in the most expensive town, $55 million. Like that. Those are Silicon Valley numbers right there. So,
so one other thing I want to ask. So you're making a video on the George Floyd 5 years
Yes.
later, and